Hey folks, tonight we're diving into the mysterious and oh-so-glamorous world of Japanese courtesans. These women weren't just entertainers. Nope, they were artists, elite companions, masters of intrigue, and occasionally survivors of unimaginable pressure. But here's a rarely talked about topic. What happened when these high-class courtesans got pregnant? From secret abortions to weird herbal remedies and even creepy rituals whispered behind closed doors, their methods were often shocking and heartbreaking. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, only if you really dig what I do here, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Always cool to see who's joining us from all over the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soothing white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey. Picture this: you're wrapped in 12 layers of silk, so tight you can barely breathe. Your hair's styled with enough pins to conduct electricity, and your feet are stuffed into wooden clogs so tall that one wrong step could send you straight to the afterlife. Welcome to a day in the life of a busy period courtesan. Yoshiwara, Tokyo's most famous red light district, wasn't just a neighborhood, so it was a stage. A fantasy world cloaked in incense smoke, lantern light, and heavy denial. To the outside world, courtesans were living art. They danced. They played shamisen. They recited poetry. But above all, they mastered the art society valued most pretending. Everything was just fine. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Behind the fans and flirtations, courtesan life was less Cinderella and more a fancy hostage situation. These women were bought young, often sold by their families for a sack of rice and vague promises of a better future. They were trained like a mix of opera singers and gladiators. Don't get it twisted, they were elite, but they were also owned. Every step they took, every smile for a client, every penny they earned belonged to someone else, usually the brothel owner or oya, which in Japanese means Lord of Good Lighting. Courtesans were products, investments, and pregnancies? Yeah, pregnancy was the biggest defect you could have, because if losing money sucks in business, having your best product out of commission for 9 months was a nightmare. Now, in a perfect world, a fourth son might get to attend a baby shower, have a chat, or maybe do some prenatal yoga and hot stone therapy. But this isn't a perfect world. This is Yoshiwara, where stones might actually be thrown at you if you break a contract. Being pregnant didn't just mean losing your job. It meant scandal, punishment, literally blood in the bathwater. So while the streets outside echoed with high heels and laughter, the rooms inside hid darker truths, secrets whispered behind screens, remedies passed down not from healers, but survivors. This was a world of silk and steel, gentle on the surface, brutal underneath. And for the courtesans inside, pregnancy wasn't just a problem. It was a permanent stain. If you ever signed a contract without reading the fine print, congrats. You share that little trait with an Edo period courtesan, except in her case, the fine print said things like, "You'll never own your life again," and, "Oh, and by the way, don't get pregnant unless you like pain, shame, and herbal poison. Courtesans didn't enter this world with resumes and references. Most were sold into it as little girls, sometimes as young as 7, by families who needed cash or just didn't want another mouth to feed. It was the 1600s. No Netflix to binge, so people entertained themselves by selling their daughters and blaming fate. Once inside the brothel, everything came with a price. The kimono she wore, the debts, the hair oil, the debts, lessons in poetry, tea ceremony, and pretending to enjoy middle-aged men, yammering on about rice taxes, debt. By the time she was ready to see clients, she owed more money than a failed startup. Now, the contract, and let's use that term loosely since she had zero legal say in it, was basically a glorified leash. It decided when she slept, who she served, how she laughed, and most importantly, her uterus was purely decorative. Pregnancy wasn't on the menu. And let's not forget the clients, a bunch of drunk samurai, affection-starved merchants, and the occasional poet who thought whispering about cherry blossoms was foreplay. These guys weren't looking for a long-term commitment. Most didn't even bother making eye contact. And if they got a woman pregnant, poof, they vanished faster than your paycheck after payday. Of course, the brothel didn't blame the men. That would be way too progressive. Instead, the woman, the walking investment, got accused of carelessness, like she just accidentally tripped into her 3rd trimester. At some places, even the suspicion of pregnancy was enough to knock a courtesan down to the lowest rank, with fewer teeth and more complaints. Worse yet, she might get locked up until the whole mess was sorted. See, the problem wasn't just sex. It was control, reputation, and money, and babies. Babies were bad for business, because nothing shatters romantic illusions faster than morning sickness. So, what happens when a courtesan in Yoshiwara does something she absolutely wasn't allowed to do? No, not love. That was frowned upon, but doable. We're talking about the big one, the moment her belly started to swell for reasons other than too much fish soup. Pregnancy, the final plot twist. You see, in this silk-wrapped prison, pregnancy wasn't some beautiful miracle. It was a biological betrayal that could wreck a career. In modern terms, it's like your iPhone suddenly deciding it wants to be a toaster. Nice, maybe useful, but nope. The courtesan's job was to entertain, charm, and keep up the illusion that every client, no matter how hairy, drunk, or emotionally unstable, was her one true love, a baby that shattered the fantasy. Suddenly, clients might remember every action has consequences, and no one pays premium rates to be reminded they left their real family. Across town, for the brothel, pregnancy wasn't a health issue. It was a product effect. A courtesan's value depended on her availability. If she was busy growing a tiny human, she wasn't serving tea, singing, or flirting with men old enough to be her grandpa. That meant no money for her, no money for the brothel, and you can bet someone was very, very pissed off. No condolences, no congrats banners welcoming the new arrival, just lots of whispered gossip behind her back, and the ever-present threat of being demoted from living artwork to unsellable dead weight. Best case, she could hide out until the problem was resolved, which is just a fancy way of saying, deal with it yourself, or else. Worst case, she got kicked out, broke, and with a reputation so trashed that even the cheapest tea houses wouldn't touch her, and the baby, let's just say. This definitely wasn't a culture built on maternity leave. Pregnancy in the courtesan world wasn't just banned, it was feared, because once it happened, everything changed. Once the shiny center of the district became a quiet warning to the others, a reminder, hidden in silence and shame, that bringing life into this world would probably end yours. You'd think in a place like Yoshiwara, where secrets flew more freely than sake, something as small as pregnancy might be handled with quiet sympathy and discreet tact. Yeah. Nope. The moment a courtesan suspects she's pregnant, a ticking clock sounds in her head, not counting down to motherhood, but to destruction. And don't get it twisted, she's totally alone. No bestie rushing over with pickles and pep talks. No, Juan, once the sparkling heart of the district, turned into a silent warning to everyone else. A reminder, whispered through silence and shame, that bringing life into this world might just end your own. You'd think in a place like Yoshiwara, where secrets spill more freely, something as small as pregnancy could be handled with quiet sympathy and discreet tact. Yeah. No. The moment a courtesan suspects she's pregnant, a ticking clock starts in her head, not counting down to motherhood, but to destruction. And don't get it twisted, she's utterly alone. No bestie rushing in with comforting words and pickles. No spa days or prenatal massages. Just paper-thin walls, fake smiles, and a mountain of lies. Everything turns into a covert operation. Morning sickness, blame some nasty shellfish. Tired, just a little worn out from dancing all night. Foggy cycle. Oh, my sweet summer child. Don't you dare say that out loud. Beneath the glam of painted faces and elegant kimonos lies a parallel world of whispered secrets, silent rituals, and quiet panic. The courtesan, life isn't just a pretty show. Painted faces and fancy kimonos lies a parallel world of whispered secrets, silent rituals, and quiet panic. The courtesan, share remedies in code, passed down like haunted family recipes. Try the 3-leaf tea, not 5. 5 points for headaches. 3 points for, even checking if you're pregnant has to be hush-hush. Some girls become pros at reading their bodies like they're cracking enemy codes. A missed period could mean something, right, stress, dieting, Mercury in retrograde, or, as they called it in Edo times, you pissed off another god, and if you're sure, that's when the real show begins. You still have to work, flirt, endure client harassment, those same clients who probably caused this mess in the first place without a clue. It's emotional espionage in high heels. Some courtesans even change the way they walk to hide body changes. They'll tighten their maternity belts a notch more, risking fainting rather than letting a tiny bump show. Not vanity, survival, and of course, all this while, still being charming. Because God forbid your emotional meltdown ruins someone's carefully purchased romantic evening. Beneath those layers of silk and makeup are women silently battling their own biology and a world demanding perfection but offering zero grace. And it all has to stay secret, because once the secret's out, it's not just the kimono that can get ruined. Let's talk tea, not the kind you sip while gossiping about the neighbor's suspicious new kimono. No, this tea has a very different purpose: pain, cramps, bleeding, and a risk of death. Welcome to the courtesan's secret weapon, bruises from herbal abortions. Because when you can't just stroll into a pharmacy and ask for a quiet abortion, you turn to Mother Nature and hope she's feeling merciful. The most notorious players at this deadly tea party are mugwort, castor bean, and Canzo Acaus licorice root, which sounds innocent until you realize it's dosed so heavily it could flip your uterus like a pancake. This isn't your average sleepy t-shirt. These are brewed like fairy tale potions gone dark, steep long, drink hot, and gulp down like you're praying to every god and ancestor you can remember. Does it sometimes work? Does it wreck your organs, cause hallucinations, or make you feverish like you're previewing the afterlife? Yep. Recipes vary wildly. Some are traded by courtesans like encrypted scrolls. Add ginger if you want faster results. Some say, don't use too much castor bean or your skin will burn. Others whisper warnings. Part science, part superstition, and all-out uncontrolled disaster. The worst part, you have to keep working through all this. Imagine greeting clients, flashing sweet smiles, chatting about moonlight and cherry blossoms, while blood's dripping inside and you're just praying this cup does its job. And if the tea doesn't work, well, it's time for Plan B, because in this game, there's no good solution, just a ladder of awful ones, each darker than the last. For some, herbal tea's enough. For others, it's just the opening act of a drama called Please Don't Let the Brothel Find Out. But the truth is clear. The playground of pleasure, even something as innocent as tea, can become a deadly gamble. And when your life is stitched together with silk, smiles, and secrets, one wrong sip can ruin everything. If the tea fails, and honestly, herbal remedies aren't perfect. There's always another option. Moving on to the next desperate fix. Because in this game, there's no good solution, just a staircase of horrors, each step darker than the last. For some, herbal tea does the trick. For others, it's just the opening act of a drama called Please Don't Let the Brothel Find Out. But the truth is obvious. These playgrounds, even something as harmless as tea, can turn deadly. And when your life is stitched together by silk, smiles, and secrets, one wrong sip can wreck it all. If tea fails, and honestly, herbal remedies aren't exactly foolproof, there's always another option. More practice. Enter the midwives, not the cute, smiling ones you picture from fairy tales. No, these are women of the shadows, ghosts haunting Yoshiwara's alleys, stories passed between trembling lips. No signs, no appointments, no receipts, just pain, blood, and a lot of prayers. They operate in the shadows, were called Basan, literally old ladies. Many of them got caught once. Retirement wasn't a choice, just harsh reality catching up. No savings, no pension, and definitely no dating scene for queer-haired ladies. They became the unofficial problem solvers. You couldn't find them. You only heard whispers, a name muttered, a neatly folded paper tucked in a sleeve. You knocked on the wrong door at the wrong hour, hoping you had enough cash and guts. Their tools were usually a mix of crude instruments, boiling water, rags, and whatever was handy, surgical steel hygiene concepts from another century. No anesthesia, no follow-up care. Just grit your teeth and pray the gods were too busy to notice. But for desperate courtesan women, these midwives were saviors, stern, sharp, no questions asked, no lies told. Payment wasn't always cash. Some brought hairpins, jewelry, or silk scarves. There's a tale about one midwife who accepted a rare perfume as hush money, then wore it daily like a war medal. Serious infection risk, hemorrhaging, permanent infertility, or worse. Many girls never came back to the brothel. Official excuse, she had a fever. Unofficially, she grabbed reality with both hands and didn't make it. If things went south, no legal backup. What exactly do you tell the cops? Hello, officer? I tried an illegal abortion while working in a government-run red light district. Can you arrest me last? Please. These midwives were the last stop before destruction or exile. No training, no rituals, just candlelight, shaky hands, and hoping death wouldn't show up today. Somehow, even in this bloody, terrifying world, trust formed between the broken and the ones breaking them silently. In most cultures, a hot bath means peace, relaxation, a little self-care after pretending to like your job all day. But in the Edo-era courtesan world, a hot bath could mean something darker and way more intense. Welcome to the boiling water bath method, a home remedy promising to solve your problem by turning your uterus into a mini hell sauna. The idea is simple. Soak in a tub so hot, your body just says, nope, not carrying this pregnancy. Think spa day designed by a vindictive quack with a grudge against reproductive health. This was whispered about behind paper screens. They said stay in until you feel dizzy. Fainting still counts as a win. Best medical advice ever. Some girls added special herbs to the water, mugwort. Naturally, because apparently that plant's the Swiss Army knife for wrecking uteruses. Others drank sake beforehand because why not mix internal poisoning with external overheating? Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. You weren't just risking pregnancy. You were risking your life. Sunburn, shock, heat stroke. There are stories of women fainting mid-bath, dragged out unconscious, only to quietly die in some secret room while the brothel kept running at night. Nothing kills the vibe like stepping over a corpse on your way to the tray, yet. The method stuck around because it was fast, cheap, and pretty discreet. No tools, no midwife, just water and willpower and a ridiculously high pain threshold. Sunburn, shock, heat stroke. There are tales of women fainting mid-bath and being dragged out unconscious. only to die quietly in some secret room while the brothel keeps humming at night. Nothing kills the mood like stepping over a corpse on your way to the tray. Still, this method survives because it's fast, cheap, and relatively discreet. No tools, no midwives, just water, willpower, and a ridiculously high pain threshold. Courtesans are told to breathe through the pain, stay calm, keep quiet even as their bodies are boiled from the inside out. Also, the brothel doesn't lose its biggest cash cow, because nothing screams customer service like making sure a girl self-destructs quietly in the back room. If bathing worked, the pregnancy would be over already. If not, there are always better options. In a world where a baby can cost you status, contracts, or even your life, nearly dying in the tub doesn't seem that extreme. Just another Tuesday, when herbal tea fails and you need something stronger, your contract, or even your life. Nearly dying in a bath isn't that dramatic. Just a regular Tuesday, when herbal tea fails and a hot bath doesn't cut it. The courtesan turns to an ancient, time-tested trick, pretending everything's peachy. Tighten up. What's the idea? Wrap your belly tight enough and maybe, just maybe, you can squeeze the baby right out of existence. Or at least, hide it long enough to dodge scandal and avoid becoming the plaything of drunken old men and stinky merchants. Enter stomach binding, aka Hirobi, basically a DIY corset, long strips of fabric wrapped round and round the lower torso until the courtesan looks like a very unappetizing sushi roll, someone desperately hiding a secret deep inside. Of course, there are minor nuisances like breathing problems, digestion issues, and the tiny inconvenience of crushed internal organs. But hey, comfort is optional in pleasure quarters. Image is king. Some courtesans tie themselves so tight they can barely sit, let alone dance, pour tea, or chat about cherry blossoms. But they do it anyway, because flaunting a pregnancy is social suicide. And in Yoshiwara, appearances aren't just kept up, they're enforced. Courtesans become posture pros. Standing tall isn't elegance, it's about keeping pressure on the uterus. Slouching means loosening the bind. Loosening means discovery. Discovery means doom. Some even sleep while still wrapped up, as if squeezing their waist 24/7 will convince the fetus to rethink its life choices and quietly back out. Spoiler, it doesn't work. And binding doesn't stop the pregnancy. Best case, it delays the reveal. Worst case, complications happen. Tissue tears, dizziness, fainting, internal bleeding. But none of that matters when the alternative is losing everything you've bled, smiled, and danced for. It's not about comfort, not even safety. It's survival and illusion, because in the world of Japanese courtesans, the belly must be flat, the smile serene, and the truth buried deep beneath layers of silk and shame. Even if what you're really hiding is misery, you gotta admire the creativity, because when tea, baths, and tight wraps don't fix the problem, courtesans sometimes turn to the ultimate comfort in any crisis food, but not just any food. Rice balls soaked in sake. Yes, fermented rice wrapped carefully in cloth, eaten with the hope it might dissolve an unwanted pregnancy just like Yesterday's story suggested. The logic is sketchy, but the desperation is real. Rumor has it vinegar, deer meat, and some fermented foods weaken the uterus. The courtesans' helpers, old maids, with half a box of herbs strapped to their aprons, swear if you eat the right ingredients, you can wash away the seed. Sounds like a tragic fairy tale, and in many ways, it is. Recipes varied by district. In one brothel, the mix was warm sake with crushed garlic and pickled plums, probably tasting like to spare with a side of nausea. Another favorite, rice balls marinated in vinegar, ginger, and shame, served cold, ice cold. Does it work? You know the answer. Not really, unless you count the side effects of puking and stomach pain. But in a world where your entire future depends on hiding your condition, even a placebo with side effects is worth a shot. Some courtesans were told to chant little poems while eating, part spiritual ritual, part emotional coping mechanism. Something like, "Go back to the river, little one, for now is not your time." Then they, flushing out the seed. Sounds like a tragic fairy tale, and in many ways it is. The recipe changes by region. At one brothel, they mixed warm sake with crushed garlic and pickled plums, probably tasted like to spare with a side of nausea. Another popular dish was vinegar-soaked rice balls, ginger, and shame greens, served cold, very cold. Does it work? You know the answer. Not really, unless you count vomiting and stomach cramps as working. But in a world where your entire future depends on hiding the condition, even a placebo with side effects is worth a shot. Some courtesans were told to chant little poems while eating, partly spiritual ritual, partly emotional coping mechanism. Something like, "Return to the river, little one, for now is not your time." Then they, side effects were worth trying. Some courtesan folks had to chant little poems while eating, part spiritual ritual, part emotional coping mechanism. Something like, "Return to the river, little child, for now is not your time." Then they'd swallow, trying not to choke. There's something heartbreakingly human and innocent about this method, a kind of hopeful magic passing through trembling hands, because unlike midwives or boiling bathwater, this felt gentler, more like a ritual or a prayer. But no amount of Sika could rewrite biology. Sure, those rice balls were comforting, but rarely effective. Still, the courtesan faithful kept at it. Those rice balls bring comfort. They rarely deliver results. Still, the courtesans keep at it, trying, because when your body is no longer yours and your choices shrink to pain or secrecy, sometimes your last shred of power is believing in something, even if it's just a soggy rice ball soaked in old booze and a whispered apology. So imagine a pregnant woman. She's scared, bleeding from herbal tea, maybe from boiling half a fruit in a hot water tub. And she's tried every rice ball recipe in the folk cookbook, naturally. The next logical step might be to tell the father, "Oh, honey, that guy's long gone. Courtesan life doesn't run on shared parental responsibility. They live in a fantasy where the client pays for the illusion, and as soon as that illusion shatters, poof, the man vanishes like a samurai caught in a scandal. Most clients are married. The others are officials, nobles, or merchants with reputations they're desperate to keep spotless. None want illegitimate kids from the playground, so when that fourth son starts worrying about possible consequences, the usual response is sorry. I'm moving to Osaka for good. Also, I don't know you. Courtesans are trained not to expect loyalty. That's why any emotional attachment is seen as dangerous. Yet plenty of women cling to the fragile hope that the guy they see week after week, always bringing gifts and sharing secrets, might do the right thing. He doesn't, even in rare cases where the client wants to help. Legal and social walls make acknowledgement nearly impossible. Adopting the child means scandal. Scandal means fallout. And for most Idato men, fallout is scarier than commitment. Some try to quietly leave money behind. A few gold coins handed to a brothel servant, with instructions to keep it safe. Others just pretend they don't know the woman. You have to get this. Courtesan life is a pipe dream, and pipe dreams don't get pregnant. So when reality shows up with morning sickness, swollen feet, or foggy periods, men do what men have done through many chapters of history. They get really good at disappearing. The silence of the father isn't just literal, it's culture, institution, tradition. No messages, no visits, no name on the scroll, just another shadow in an already crowded world of them. And for the courtesan, there's no time for grief or anger, just the next performance, the next lie, and the silence growing louder in her belly. If pregnancy is a personal disaster, getting caught by the brothel is apocalypse, with catastrophic fallout, zero sympathy, and absolutely no baby shower. See, the brothel isn't just your workplace, it's your whole world. The owner, the manager, the stylist, the wardens all in one, and like most profit-driven organizations that couldn't care less about people, this one has one golden rule: no pregnancies allowed. So what happens when a courtesan slips up? Well, this isn't handled delicately or with a calm sit-down talk with the boss. No, we're here to support your feelings. Just lots of side eyes, passive fan flicks, and the creeping dread that you're about to be thrown under the golden bus. When suspicion hits, maybe you're walking a little slower, eating a little less, or just being overly careful. Whispers start. First the rumors she's gaining weight, looks pale, missed her period. I heard that from the chambermaid emptying chamber pots. Then comes the surveillance. Suddenly, you're not allowed to leave the room alone anymore. Your friends are told to report on your activities. You get fewer tasks. The side-eye glances, the passive-aggressive fan flicks, and that creeping dread you're about to get tossed under. A gilded bus. When doubt sneaks in, maybe you're walking slower, eating less, or just being way too cautious. Whispers start. First, rumors she's getting fat. She looks pale. She's skipped her period. I overheard that from the chambermaid dumping the chamber pot. Then comes the surveillance. Suddenly, you're not allowed to leave the room alone anymore. Your friends get roped into reporting your every move. You get fewer tasks, not out of kindness, but because they're prepping your replacement. And finally, If they're sure, there's punishment now. This varies depending on the mood, status, and general cruel vibe of the brothel that day. Some folks demote the courtesan to the lowest rank, forcing her to serve the rudest, drunkest, and filthiest clients you can imagine. Others just lock her in a room until she fixes the problem. Some simply kick her out. No money, no backup, just a lousy bundle of silk, and a warning for the rest. In posher homes, they pretended to be discreet. They said she was taking a retreat or visiting family, but everyone knew what that really meant. Pregnancy wasn't just a personal failure, it was a business risk, a kind of imaginary contamination, and in a system built entirely on fantasy. Reality was considered downright rude, so when the brothel found out, no tears, no hugs, just cold calculations. And the woman quietly broke a rule everyone pretended was unbreakable. When you've tried every kind of tea, swallowed vinegar rice balls, nearly steamed yourself like a dumpling abroad, and the brothel starts, looking at you like a busted lantern, you've got two choices: confess and face the music, or run like hell. And some courtesan zealots picked option 2. They vanished. In the districts, they were called ninja jororo, basically, runaway prostitutes, which roughly means, she wrecked the dream, now go fetch her, because running away wasn't just frowned upon, it was illegal. Your property, and when property walks off with a baby, the brothel takes it personally. But that didn't stop them. Some courtesans fled at midnight, disguised in simple robes with hair down, shedding their fancy identities like a snake sheds its skin. They slipped through alleys, rode laundry carts, or hid in barrels. Yes, barrels. Really, barrels. Dramatic, dangerous, and extremely cinematic. So where did they go? Anywhere that didn't require perfume and pretending. Their cousin's farm, a mountain temple, a fishing village where no one asks questions unless you steal their sake, places where the name Yoshiwara didn't open doors, it shut them. Not everyone made it. Some got caught, dragged back, and publicly punished, serving as both warnings and morale boosters. For the rest, see what happens when you act like you have free will. Others disappeared completely and became urban legends. Ever hear about Yoran, who ran off to become a nun? Rumor has it she's living on a hill now, reading fortunes and raising a kid like a ghost. But running isn't freedom. It's just another cage where you trade makeup and money for silence and survival. Yet for many, it's the only option they still feel is right, because when your whole world is painted with rules and red lipstick, the scariest thing isn't leaving, it's staying and pretending it never happened. So they run, not for revenge, not for rebellion, just to chase the smallest, most dangerous pleasure, hope. Imagine a courtesan who can't run, can't drink enough tea, can't fake laughter anymore, and finally, the lie she carries gets too big to hide under. Silk. Only one thing left to do: give birth quietly, invisibly, preferably with no one the wiser. Welcome to the secret world of silent births, where mothers appear at midnight behind sliding paper doors with cloth stuffed in their mouths to muffle screams. No birthing chairs, no cheerful midwives in aprons, no joyful cries, just urgency, fear, and if you're lucky, someone who knows how to boil water without asking. Sometimes it happens in secret rooms the brothel doesn't know about. Other times, it's in storage closets behind curtains or even outside after dark, because nothing captures the magical miracle of life like squatting behind the outhouse with a handkerchief clenched in your teeth. Courtesan has to keep calm, because if she makes too much noise, it's not just scandal she risks. She's risking exile, or worse. No grand ceremonies, no name calls, just a bundle of blood and breath wrapped in cloth and hidden away. No cheers, just urgency, fear, and if you're lucky, someone who knows how to boil water without asking for a manual. Sometimes, this happens in secret rooms the brothel doesn't even know about. Other times, it's in a storage closet behind curtains or even outside in the dark, because nothing says life's beautiful miracle like squatting behind the outhouse with a handkerchief clenched in your teeth. The courtesan has to keep calm, because if she makes too much noise, she risks more than just scandal. She's risking exile or worse. No flashy rituals, no name-calling ceremonies, just a bloody bundle and breath wrapped up in cloth and hidden away. Before dawn, if you're lucky, a maid or a retired housekeeper might help. They're the women who've seen it all but keep their lips sealed. They bring cloths, boiling water, whisper, prayers, and never ask what happens to the baby afterward. And the baby, well, that's the question nobody wants to answer. Some were taken away immediately, others hid in corners for days, fed in silence, loved with trembling hands, but everyone knew it was just temporary. The child didn't belong here. No place for innocence in this playground. What these women had to endure physically and mentally was almost unimaginable, but they did it because the alternative was worse. They gave birth like ghosts, then wiped their face, fixed their hair, and went back to the brothel floor like nothing happened. No maternity leave, no postpartum care, just a normal performance, because at Yoshiwara, the show must go on. If a courtesan could secretly give birth, there was still one more problem, a tiny, crying, incredibly fragile problem, and in pleasure quarters, kids are not lucky charms. They're liabilities, noisy, hungry, and impossible to explain to your next customer. So, what did she do? She walked under the cover of night to the edge of town, to the roadside, to a place built for tragedy, a temple of abandonment called the Koya or Ubazus sites. These quiet stone shrines sit on society's margins, between worship and trash. They aren't advertised, but everyone knows they exist and what they're for. A mother, usually a courtesan, a servant, or any woman society failed, would leave her newborn on the doorstep, wrapped up tight, sometimes with a name, sometimes just a tiny charm or folded prayer note tucked into the cloth, then walk away. No goodbyes, no witnesses, no turning back. If lucky, a monk or kind stranger might find the child. Sometimes a temple would take them in and raise them quietly. Other times, they'd be sent to orphanages, enslaved, or just vanish into forgotten stories. The courtesan woman didn't abandon her child because she didn't care. She left because there was no other way. Brothels don't allow children. The law offers zero protection. And even if she ran away, what kind of future could she offer a baby while dodging bounty hunters with nothing but a comb and a blood-stained belt? So, she did the unthinkable, not out of cruelty, but love warped by despair. Some temples are said to be haunted. Locals swear they hear crying at night, not from babies, but from the women who abandoned them, those echoes of regret carved into the wind like invisible tombstones. It's not just a shrine, it's an altar for every dream that never stood a chance. And the worst part, no one ever asked who left the child, because in the fleeting world of the courtesan, everyone already knew. They just pretended not to. According to traditional Japanese beliefs, an unborn or aborted child isn't just a medical footnote, it's a soul. And in the courtesan world, these souls are everywhere. They're called Mizuko, literally water children, a poetic name for something incredibly heavy. The souls of babies never born or born, but never nurtured. And no matter how silent the birth, how quiet the abandonment, these souls don't just vanish, they linger. People believe Mizuko can drift between worlds, not quite living, but not fully passed on either. In many ways, they mirror the women who carry them. After all, courtesans exist between realities, charming but enslaved, worshipped but abandoned, present but unseen. And so a strange kinship forms, one ghost carrying another. Some women are haunted not just emotionally but spiritually. They say Mizuko can cause misfortune, illness, or nightmares. If not properly honored, courtesans, women with no freedom in life, seek freedom for their unborn children in death. That's when the Mizuko Kuyo ritual shows up. A secret ceremony, a whispered apology, an emotional exorcism done with prayer beads and incense. The ceremony was small, sometimes held in a quiet temple outside the district, sometimes done in secret, late at night, with just a flickering lantern and shaky hands. Offerings were left behind children's toys, flowers, tiny red bibs tied around statues of Jizo, the Buddhist god who protects kids and travelers. Courtesans couldn't raise children themselves, but they could beg the gods to watch over them. The only parental act they were allowed, and it was heartbreaking. Imagine lighting incense for a child you never got to name, whispering, "I'm sorry, kid," so not because you didn't love them, but because you did in a world that gave you no chance to show it. Some came back year after year, unable to forget. Others visited once and never returned, too scared to reopen the wound, but they all carried it with them, because even in a world built on forgetting, some memories refuse to sink. Mizuko are not just souls. They are reminders that love still exists, even if just briefly, even in the darkest corners of silk and shadow. In Yoshiwara, the pleasure district, it was always noisy, Laughter echoed through lantern-lit alleys. Music bounced off sliding doors. Perfumed clients shouted about loves they had zero intention of actually pursuing. Courtesans giggled, so poured sake, and lied hundreds of times an hour, all for the price of illusion. But beneath all that noise, something was perfectly still. Silence. A very intentional kind. The kind that locks down certain topics like a velvet padlock. And at the heart of that silence was the unspoken rule: no talking about pregnancy. Every courtesan carried an invisible weight: contracts, expectations, debts, desires, and for the pregnant ones, that weight tripled overnight. It pressed down on their lungs, their choices, even their skin, yet somehow they kept dancing. They kept performing, smiling at jokes they'd heard 1,000 times, painting their lips blood red and pretending nothing else was bleeding, because power in Yoshiwara wasn't muscle, it was endurance, the ability to wear pain like a costume, only crying when your makeup isn't waterproof, to bind your womb, bind your heart tight, and keep serving tea like nothing. Inside you is breaking apart. Some might say they're trapped, and yeah, they totally are. But even in their cage, they find ways to sing. They learn to master not their fate, but how they show it. They comfort each other with gestures instead of words. They guard secrets not out of shame, but because trust is rare and sacred. They teach young girls the rules of silence, how to hide, how to lie convincingly, how to survive one more day in a world that profits from their obedience. They're not fragile like glass. They're delicate like porcelain, beautiful, dangerous if mishandled, and built to withstand pressure over centuries. No one writes poems about that kind of strength. No plays, no woodblock prints, just silence and survival. But if you look closely at the tilted head, the squint, the slight tremble of the hands pouring tea, it's still there. They are artists, sure, but they're also warriors painted and wrapped in silk. And for those carrying unbearable pain, unborn pain, forgotten pain, shame no one dares mention, standing strong is the kind of power disguised as grace, as elegance, but don't get it twisted, that's power. They were never meant to be remembered. Courtesans exist to be consumed, not admired, desired. Painted, yes, but understood, never. And once they're off the stage, they vanish like yesterday's incense smoke, especially those who got pregnant, no statue for them, no poem engraved in stone, no history book recording the names of admired, desired is painted, yes, but understood, never. And once they vanished from the spotlight, they were swept away like yesterday's incense smoke, especially those who got pregnant, no statues for them, no poems carved in stone, no history books recording the names of the girls quietly bleeding behind folding screens, those leaving offerings for babies no one ever saw, those disappearing into the night with swollen bellies and broken contracts. But they existed and mattered. Behind every cheer and burst of laughter was a person defying the impossible. They wore beauty like armor and shame like a shadow, punished for wanting love, exiled for creating life, and buried in history's footnotes like but they still find ways to fight, not with swords or fancy speeches, but with sheer endurance, by holding on to moments of kindness in a world designed to forget them, by protecting each other in tiny, rebellious ways. Whispered warning, an illegal remedy, a silent prayer in a mossy old shrine filled with ghost stories. Remembering them isn't just about justice, it's about the truth, the tough truth we have to peel back the fancy layers to see. Pain, resilience, the quiet fury of women forced to choose between survival and self. They aren't weak. They aren't shameful. They're trapped in a system that treats their bodies like merchandise and their humanity like a crime. And yet, they endure. Some are only honored by a faded red bib on old Jizo statues. Some remembered in the mournful tunes of shamisen songs. Most go unnamed, unheard, unseen. But tonight, we remember them, not just the women trained to be courtesans, but the mothers they never got to be, girls sold too soon, women surviving secret wars behind brothel walls. They lived in the shadows, but that doesn't mean they belong there. War. It didn't start with a big boom. No. The moment that changed the Wild West forever arrived quietly, as gently as the very river flowing through America. On January 24th, 1848, James W. Marshall, a carpenter, overseeing the construction of a sawmill for a man named John Sutter, was checking the tailrace, the channel that lets water flow out from the wheel. The water was running a little too fast. Rocks had shifted. The land needed clearing. Then he saw it. A flicker. A flash. A golden glint in the shallow. Muddy water. Gold. He picked it up, rolled it between his fingers, then bit it because that's what people did back then to check if their fortune had actually arrived. He showed it to a colleague, then to Sutter, and Sutter, when he realized what this meant, wasn't thrilled. He didn't celebrate. He panicked because Sutter had dreamed of a different future, a peaceful, profitable farming empire with zero treasure hunters. The gold rush would bring chaos, land grabbers, thieves, and land disputes. And sure enough, it did, but not right away. See? For a brief moment, they tried to keep it quiet. A secret treasure, a private revolution. That moment didn't last. Within weeks, rumors spread through every tavern and trading post. By spring, sailors in San Francisco were jumping ship mid-voyage. The whole town emptied overnight. Men quit their jobs, abandoned homes, even families, all chasing the dream of that river. What started as a lucky find on the edge of a sawmill sparked the largest mass migration in American history. The gold rush swept through the air, and no one was immune. When news hit the East Coast and crossed oceans to China, Chile, and Australia, it was too late. California was no longer just some distant frontier. It was an obsession, all because one man spotted a glimmer in the dirt. This wasn't the first gold discovery in America, but it was the first to rewrite the future overnight. Because this wasn't just a find, it was a spark, and everything was about to catch fire. By 1849, California wasn't just a far-off rumor. It was a magnet, and the world was the iron. Tens of thousands, mostly men, were on the move. From New York to New Orleans, London to Lima, Canton to Cape Horn. The rush had begun. They traveled by foot, by stagecoach, across blazing deserts and icy mountains. They came on ships, rounding the tip. More than just a wild rumor, it's a magnet, and the world is iron. Tens of thousands, mostly men, are on the move. From New York to New Orleans, London to Lima, Canton to Cape Horn, the rush has begun. They travel by foot and carriage, crossing scorching deserts and icy mountains. They arrive on ships rounding the Cape of South America, drifting at sea for months, just for a chance to witness a golden miracle. They're dreamers, desperados, adventurers, con artists, disguised widows. Entire ships get abandoned in San Francisco Bay, crews rushing ashore with shovels and gold pans. Some call it madness, others destiny. By the end of that year, California's population skyrocketed from $15,000 to over $90,000. San Francisco grew from a sleepy little port into a chaotic, wild boomtown. Streets packed with tents, gambling dens, and hastily thrown up wooden shacks. The clang of picks and shovels echoed everywhere, mixed with music, shouting, and gunfire. No banks, no laws, no plumbing, just gold fever and pure madness. They called themselves the 49ers. Most arrived broke, sunburned, and covered in dust. They carried nothing but blind hope and crude tools. Few knew anything about mining. Even fewer got rich. But that dream was strong enough to push through every hardship. Some dug for months and found nothing. Others stumbled on a shiny nugget the size of a walnut and suddenly became filthy rich. Well, at least until they lost it all in a drunken poker game. And yet, they kept coming. Every creaky wagon heading west carried more than gear. It hauled ambition, desperation, and fierce belief in reinvention. Here, beyond all limits, a man could become something new. 1849 wasn't just a year. It was a turning point that reshaped not only California, but the whole idea of America, a country now obsessed with movement, luck, and the myth that the next shovel could change everything. When gold showed up, towns popped up almost overnight. A young guy got rich near a creek. News spread, and suddenly, hundreds of tents sprouted like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Within weeks, tents turned into wooden shacks. One saloon opened, then 2, then 10. A blacksmith arrived, maybe a newspaper, a casino, and just like that, Boomtown was born. They called them boomtowns because they didn't grow, they exploded. Places like Hangtown, Whiskey, Town, and Rough and Ready weren't built on city planning. They were built on adrenaline and blind hope. No mayors, no rules, no sidewalks, just mud, whiskey, and a bunch of hot-headed men with picks. By day, these guys dug into hillsides and icy rivers. By night, they drank, gambled, fought, and made terrible decisions in candlelit saloons. You could strike it rich with one lucky hit, or lose it all in a poker hand. No real laws, or rather, too many laws made up on the spot and enforced by whoever had the biggest gun or loudest voice. Justice was improvised. Courtrooms were rare. No angry mobs. But it wasn't just lawlessness. It was loneliness. The population was mostly men. For every woman, there were dozens, sometimes hundreds of men. Letters from back east spoke of homesickness, misery, and men crying quietly by their campfires. Gold wasn't always in the ground. Sometimes it was just memories of what they left behind. Some towns threshed for a while. San Francisco shifted from a sleepy port into a bustling gateway to the gold mines. But many others didn't last long when gold ran out. People vanished too. What was once a lively town became a ghost town. Buildings abandoned, saloons still littered with broken glass. The wind whispered through empty jail cells. The gold rush didn't just create towns, it swallowed them whole. With every success story, hundreds of broken dreams got buried in muddy floors and abandoned tools. But nobody came west expecting guarantees. They came for chances, and those messy, chaotic, dirty boom towns burning with hope were exactly the opportunity for a moment. The gold rush sounds romantic until you're knee-deep in freezing river water, swinging a pick at rocks, sleeping on dirt, and considering beans your only friend. Golden opportunity for a brief moment. The gold rush sounds romantic until you're knee-deep in freezing river water, swinging a pickaxe at rocks, sleeping on the ground, and counting beans as your only friend. The life of a gold seeker is anything but glamorous. It's tough, lonely, and often miserable, but they still come because of the promise of wealth. Even the tiniest sliver of hope makes people do the impossible. Most showed up with a threadbare hope and a handful of essentials: a pickaxe, a shovel, a gold pan, and maybe one or two tin plates. If you had some cash, you could splurge on a rocker box, a wooden gadget that lets you sift through way more dirt at once. If you're really rolling in dough, get yourself a long tom. If not, it's all about your hands, your grit, and your patience. Gold panning means bending over rivers for hours, stirring up sediment, praying for a flash of gold between the rocks. Some folks struck it rich overnight. Most didn't. They dug holes, moved boulders, built sluices, dammed streams, and chased every rumor of easy gold like moths to a flame. They camped in tents if lucky, or out in the open if not so much. Rain meant soggy clothes. Snow meant frozen boots. Bears were a real threat. So were thieves. Sickness was constant. Quarrels, scurvy, cholera thanks to non-existent sanitation, and miners who never washed their hands before eating. Basic food was pricey. Eggs could cost more than a day's wages. Beans, bacon, and coffee formed the holy trinity of grub. Veggies were rare, bathing optional, haircuts, forget about it. And yet, they stayed because gold was real. People found it, and if they could, maybe you could too. That's the catch. Every painful failure still carried the hope that the next shovel of dirt might change everything. So they dug, day after day, year after year. Some found nothing but dust. Others found enough to change their lives, or at least buy a hot bath and a decent pair of shoes. But success wasn't the only challenge. Persistence was real, and in the muddy chaos of gold fields, sometimes that was the only thing separating legend from oblivion. Gold doesn't come easy. It comes with a price paid in blood, sweat, and broken promises. Despite tales of overnight fortune, the truth is far harsher. Most miners didn't get rich. Some barely found enough to survive. Many left poorer than when they arrived, taking home nothing but blisters and regret. But the cost wasn't just personal, it was national. California was never empty, despite the gold rush myths telling you otherwise. Long before miners arrived, this land was home to hundreds of thousands of Native Americans across dozens of nations and tribes. But once gold was found, they became just obstacles between ambition and profit. As miners flooded in, native lands were seized, poisoned, and burned. Rivers once teeming with salmon got clogged with waste and mercury. Forests were leveled, wildlife vanished, and people were pushed out, hunted, enslaved, killed. California's government even funded militias to seize land, paying bounties for Native American scalps. By 1870, California's native population had plummeted by over 80%. The initial gold rush turned into a silent genocide, but the native tribes weren't the only ones paying a price. Mexican and Chilean miners working California hills long before 1849 soon became targets of racist laws and mobs. Chinese immigrants arriving in waves hoping for a better life faced heavy taxes and violent evictions. Black miners, free or enslaved, faced legal and physical threats every step of the way. Even white miners fought each other. Claims got stolen. Gunfire broke out in camps. Luck bred conflict, and everyone thought they deserved the prize. Gold brought chaos. It warped morals. It rewrote values. Men who once believed in family, law, and church found themselves bribing, lying, stealing, sometimes killing, all for a glimmer in a pan, because once you see gold, really see it, your soul never looks the same again. The gold rush wasn't just an event. It was a fever, us change. And every ounce pulled from the ground just buries something else deeper. Justice, peace, community, or conscience. Gold might sparkle in the river, but justice? Not so much. That's a bit harder to find. Back in the early days of the California gold rush, there were basically no real laws. California wasn't even a state yet. It was a lawless frontier that's shifting fast, where a man's wealth or the size of his pistol usually decided right from wrong. So the miners made their own rules. They cooked up the so-called mining code loose agreements about claims, boundaries, and behavior. Break the rules, and you faced a jury of your muddy, exhausted peers. But fairness was relative. He stole my shovel. You might get a warning. He found a gold nugget on my land. That might get you hanged. Yes, hanged. Vigilante justice was the norm. There weren't enough sheriffs, so towns formed vigilance committees. They crowned themselves law enforcers, quick to punish, and rarely caring about trials. Suspects might get whipped, run out of town, or tied to a tree with a rope around their neck, usually without evidence, then dragged to the saloon. Saloons weren't just for drinking, they were courtrooms, gambling dens, and sometimes execution spots. A drunken insult could lead to a shootout. A lost card game could lead to murder. Gun smoke and lawlessness danced beneath swinging lanterns. Theft ran rampant. Land grabs sparked. Full-blown wars between rival factions. Property lines were often settled with fists, bullets, or hastily nailed signs on trees. But amid the chaos, something strange happened. Communities started to form. Temporary governments were set up. Real sheriffs got elected. Towns began building tunnels instead of gallows. California drafted a constitution in 1849, even before officially becoming a state in 1850. The Wild West started taming itself, slowly, violently, and unevenly. But the scars from those lawless early days never fully healed because, in the gold mines, justice was always improvised, and even when rules came down, for many, it was too late, buried beneath hills, forgotten in dry creek beds, or dangling from branches that once played judge. The California Gold Rush wasn't just America's story. It was a global alarm bell, ringing loud and clear. By 1850, ships from every continent had docked in San Francisco Bay, sails full of wind, decks packed with dreamers. The gold rush went global, and California wasn't just a place, it was an idea. They came from Chile, seasoned miners who'd worked South American gold fields long before Sutter's Mill was discovered. They came from Peru, Mexico, and the West Indies, bringing skills, spices, and music from China. Thousands crossed the Pacific on wooden boats, fleeing famine, poverty, and chasing the promise of the Golden Mountain. Europe sent its share too. Irish, Germans, Italians, and French, many escaping revolution, poverty, or war. Even a few Aussies showed up, having struck gold back home and decided to give another continent a shot. California became chaotic, vibrant, and multilingual. Tents pitched side by side, debates held in dozens of dialects, cooking fires spread across the hills, smelling of spices from 5 continents. At first, it looked like something. It spread across the hills with scents from 5 continents. At first, it looked like something beautiful, a global gathering all chasing the same dream. But dreams have limits, and when gold ran scarce, prejudice grew fast. Foreign miners got the stink eye or worse, their success criticized, their voices mocked. Laws like foreign miner taxes popped up, slapping hefty fees and harassment on non-Americans. Chinese miners took the worst hits. They were kicked out, beaten, sometimes killed, while officials just looked the other way. Spanish-speaking miners, even those born in California, faced legal discrimination and mob violence. Racism wasn't just normal, it was official policy. Still, Many stuck around. They built communities, temples, churches, and businesses. San Francisco's Chinatown thrived. Latino towns prospered thanks to land grants from Spain, and even when pushed to the margins, these global pioneers helped shape California's future, its food, language, and spirit. The gold rush didn't just pull people west, it pulled the whole world west. And whether good or bad, it showed what happens when cultures clash, not for ideals, but for gold. Gold can run out, even if the rush doesn't. By the mid-1850s, rivers quieted down. Easy to get shiny flakes and nuggets were gone. What was left was deeper, harder to reach, needing tools most miners couldn't afford. The frenzy was over. Those expecting instant riches now faced a harsh truth. The gold rush was never a promise, just a gamble, and for most folks, the house won. Some stayed, switching from panning to working in big mining operations. These industrial setups used hydraulic mining technology. Huge water jets blasted hillsides apart to get at the precious metals. It was faster, more efficient, and way more destructive. The landscape got torn apart. Rivers clogged with debris and mercury. Downstream farmland got wrecked. Gold might have kept flowing, but at a steep price and lawsuits eventually shut down hydraulic mining decades later. Meanwhile, many original 49ers packed up and left, worn out, sick, or just plain disappointed. Some went home empty-handed. Others drifted to new frontiers, Oregon, Nevada, Colorado, chasing the next rumor, the next miracle, and a few stayed. They became shopkeepers, farmers, teachers, mayors. They built California not with shovels, but with roots. Because while the gold was drying up, something else was growing. Potential. California was changing. It wasn't some forgotten backwater anymore. It had roads, ports, towns, newspapers, banks, and eventually a state government. By 1850, just 2 years after Marshall's discovery, California officially joined the Union. The gold rush was over, but its impact was irreversible. It redrew the map, filled the West with people, ambition, and violence. It shattered native communities, transformed the economy, and turned a peaceful frontier into a symbol of America's rebirth, starting with a glint in the river and ending with a moving empire. While miners moved on, California remained a place holding gold not just in hills, but in its legends. Because sometimes the biggest treasure isn't what you dig up, it's what you build after the digging stops. The gold rush ended, but its echo never fades. Even now, nearly 2 centuries later, California wears the gold rush like a second skin. Its nickname is the Golden State. Its motto, Eureka, I found it, not subtle. This wasn't just history. It became a national identity, a cultural myth baked deep into America's DNA. Because the gold rush wasn't just about gold. It was about reinvention. It taught a young, hungry nation that wealth isn't inherited. You can chase it, dig for it, fight for it, that you don't need a fancy name just. The gold rush ended, but its echoes never did. even today, nearly 2 centuries later. California wears the gold rush like a second skin. The state's nickname Golden State. The motto Eureka, I've found it. Not subtle at all. This wasn't just a historical event. It became a national identity, a cultural myth drilled deep into America's DNA. Because the gold rush wasn't just about gold. It was a reinvention. It taught a hungry young nation that wealth isn't inherited. You chase it, dig for it, fight for it. You don't need a fancy name, just a shovel and a dash of crazy. It was the birth of the American dream as we know it. Hustle, risk, stake your claim. But legacies are messy. Sure, it sparked rapid growth, innovation, and the rise of the modern West San Francisco, railroads, California as a cultural and economic powerhouse. But it also left deep scars. Native communities were nearly wiped out, landscapes wrecked, racist laws left wounds that still sting. Chinese workers, Mexican miners, and black pioneers helped build California too. Yet their stories got buried under the shiny myth of the lucky white gold prospector with his pan. But people kept coming, maybe not just for gold, but something close technology, fame, innovation. Silicon Valley isn't far from Sutter's Mill. The tools changed from pickaxes to code, but the hunger stayed the same. That's the real legacy, the belief that somewhere over the horizon, if you're brave and lucky enough, anything can change. The gold rush wasn't just a metal rush. It was a collision of cultures, ambitions, and illusions. It showed the best and worst of humans in just a decade, turning a lucky find into one of the most transformative chapters in U.S. history. Gold's almost gone now, but the dream, oh, that's still alive and kicking. Helen Adams Keller was born on June 27th, 1880 in Tuscumbia. Alabama fields, cotton farms, and southern sunshine. Her parents, Arthur and Kate Keller, were thrilled. She was healthy, beautiful, curious, with bright blue eyes and a light, eager laugh. For the first 19 months, Helen was just a normal kid. She learned to crawl, babble, smile at her mom, and chase shadows on the porch. She loved the family dog, the garden, and the breeze. Her world was full of sounds and colors until suddenly it wasn't. In February 1882, Helen got hit by a mystery illness. Some say scarlet fever, others guess meningitis. Doctors had no clue. All anyone could do was wait. For days, she ran a high fever. Her body shook. Her mom worried, scared. Then everything shattered. The fever broke. Helen survived, but the cost was huge. She couldn't see. She couldn't hear. The world went dark and silent. Like the illness slammed a door shut, locking her inside her own body. She was less than 2 years old. At first, her family hoped it was temporary. Maybe she was just recovering slow. Maybe her eyes would adjust. Maybe she'd respond to a sound, a voice, a bell, a dog barking. But time passed, and the truth dawned. Helen was cut off from the senses that connect us to the world. Now imagine this: a lively, smart kid, suddenly unable to understand the faces smiling at her, the arms reaching out, the voices calling her name. She had no language, no signs, no way to say what she wanted or what scared her. Frustration filled the silence. Rage flared up. She learned to mimic actions, open doors, nod or shake her head, but without understanding what it meant. Her world was as textures, vibrations, smells, and inside, a storm was brewing. By age 5, Helen Keller was described as wild, smart, stubborn, and totally out of control. She'd scream, kick, even hit people not out of cruelty, but desperation. She was trapped in her own mind, and nobody knew how to reach her. Not yet. At 5. The happy girl who used to play in the garden was a completely different person, wild. Imagine being locked in total darkness. No sound, no sight, no language, just raw sensation and confusion. For Helen, life became a jumble of textures and instincts. She had no words for hunger or fear, no way to understand comfort or discipline. So she raged. She threw tantrums, kicked furniture, tore buttons off clothes, and slapped her little sister out of jealousy. Often playing in the gardens turned into a totally different, wild person. Imagine being locked in complete darkness. No sound, no sight, no language, just raw sensation and confusion. For Helen, life became a chaotic mess of textures and instincts. She had no words for hunger or fear, no way to grasp comfort or discipline. So she got mad. The kid threw tantrums, kicked furniture, tore buttons off clothes, and slapped her sister out of jealousy. Mealtime turned into a battlefield. She ate with her hands, snatched food from plates, and screamed when anyone tried to correct her. Her mood flipped from giggles to rage without warning. The Kellers were clueless. Their daughter was brilliant. That was obvious. She had habits, figured out how to open doors, unlock cabinets, even mimic chores. But her smarts made her defiance more dangerous. Her parents were exhausted. Relatives whispered she should be institutionalized, locked up in an asylum. Her mother, Kate, refused to give up. She started writing letters, begging for help, not just from doctors, but anyone who might know how to reach a child like Helen. This hunt led them to Alexander Graham Bell, who didn't just invent the telephone, but was also big into deaf education. Bell didn't have a magic fix, but he had a suggestion. He directed them to a school in Boston, the Perkins Institute for the Blind. There, a young woman was sent down south to meet the Kellers. Her name was Anne Sullivan. She was 20, partially blind, dirt poor, fiercely determined, and totally unprepared for the storm she was about to walk into. When Anne arrived in Alabama in March 1887, she was greeted by a smart, pretty kid with wild hair, untamed eyes, a mischievous grin, and screams loud enough to shatter windows. Helen Keller wasn't cruel. She was trapped. The world had slammed its doors shut, and she was banging on them with everything she had, Anne Sullivan had one job open that door, and nothing was going to stop her, not the rage, not the silence, not the blindness. March 1887, Scumbia, Alabama. A young woman named Anne Sullivan arrived, determined to teach the unteachable. She moved into a small house on the Keller property, took Helen out of the main house, away from the pampering, distractions, and pity. Anne's method, basic structure, discipline, and above all, language. But how do you teach language to a kid who can't hear words or see letters? Anne started spelling letters into Helen's hand using a deaf alphabet, D-O-L. She signed into Helen's palm while handing her a doll. Helen copied the motions. She was smart, curious, but to her it was just a finger game, meaningless gestures. She could mimic hundreds of signs, but still didn't get that everything had a name. Anne didn't give up. She spelled out the names of everything Helen touched: cake, cup, spoon, water, bread, key. But the kid didn't connect the dots. There was no concept yet, no clue that those shapes in her palm stood for the world around her. Then came April 5th, 1887, a day that went down in history. Anne took Helen to the outdoor water pump. One hand placed Helen's fingers under the cool water. The other wrote the letter W into her own palm over and over again. Water splashed. Fingers moved. W-A-T-E-R. Suddenly, Helen froze. The chaos inside her calmed down. Her face lit up with surprise. She dropped the cup. She touched the ground and spelled the word earth. She touched the pump and spelled pump. She touched Anne's dress, her face, and her hand. She got it for the first time in her life. Helen Keller understood that everything has a name, and words can be touched, felt, and learned. That moment shattered the walls that had imprisoned her since she was little. A door opened, and Helen, once locked in silent darkness, had found her way through. By nightfall, she'd learned 30 words, and she went on to learn thousands more. But that was the moment. The moment silence faded, and the world finally made sense. Once Helen understood that words meant something, there was no turning back. The door was open, and now she wanted to run through it. Her mind, starved for years, devoured everything Anne offered: nouns, verbs, adjectives. She wanted to name the whole world, every object, every feeling, every emotion. Nothing was too small, abstract, or complicated. Anne could barely keep up. She taught Helen through real life. They walked through gardens, touched flowers, leaves, bark, dirt. Helen learned the word flower by feeling a rose, learned tree by hugging a trunk, learned storm by standing in the rain. She didn't just want to know what things were, she wanted to know why. She asked deep philosophical questions. What is love? Where does the sun go at night? Why do people cry? This wasn't memorization, it was awakening. She also started to grasp manners and morals, not just right and wrong, but also right and wrong. Anne spelled out stories into her hand, Bible parables, Aesop's fables, poetry, fairy tales. Through them, Helen learned about kindness, selfishness, generosity, and justice. Language wasn't just power, it was freedom. Helen even started writing her first simple sentences using a special board with raised lines. Every word she spelled made her feel more human, more seen. The frustration that once made her scream and smash things turned into purpose. But none of this happened by accident. Anne Sullivan worked tirelessly, often 16 hours a day, to unlock Helen's potential. She wasn't just a teacher. She was translator, mentor, protector, and best friend. Their bond was deeper than family, closer than blood. Anne once called herself half-blind and unwanted. Now she was shaping one of this. Newspapers began running stories about the Wonder Kid in Alabama, the deaf-blind girl who now reads, writes, and learns faster than anyone thought possible. Helen's hunger for knowledge, still ravenous? If you think she's done, think again. Now that she has a voice, even if it's finger-spelled, she's dying to chat with the world, and one day she will. By the time she was 10, Helen Keller had smashed every expectation. She could read Braille, write full sentences, and spell out conversations with lightning speed. She devoured books, memorized poetry, and debated complex ideas with Anne. But that wasn't enough. Helen didn't just want to communicate. She wanted to speak. Sounds crazy. Right, deaf, and blind. How on earth could she learn to form words she'd never heard, made up of sounds she'd never experienced? But Helen didn't ask permission. She demanded to be taught. So, in 1890, her family sent her off to Boston's Horace Mann School for the Deaf. There, she met Sarah Fuller, a dedicated speech teacher willing to try the impossible. The method tactile, Helen placed her fingers on Sarah's lips, cheeks, and throat as Sarah spoke. She felt the vibrations of sound, the shape of the mouth, the tongue's movements. Then, slowly and painfully, she began to imitate one letter, one word at a time. She practiced non-stop, sounding out syllables in front of the mirror, feeling her own face, repeating each sound dozens of times. Her first word, next came, I have. Tiny steps, enormous courage. It wasn't easy. At first, her voice was barely understandable. Even her closest family struggled to make sense of her words. But Helen kept going because, to her, speech was freedom on a whole new level, a bridge to a world she'd never really entered. And every day, her pronunciation got better. Anne was always right there, encouraging, correcting, praising, together. They turned what seemed like magic into a method. By age 12, Helen could speak full sentences. Over time, she learned to give speeches, recite poetry, even join lively conversations, though most people still needed an interpreter to get what she was saying. But who cares? Helen Keller had done what even the most optimistic thought impossible. She spoke up in the silence. She can't remember ever hearing her own voice, but she created something with breath, muscle, and pure defiance. She found her voice, and planned to use it for the rest of her life. By her teens, Helen Keller had achieved more than most people do in a lifetime. But she wasn't satisfied with just being a miracle. She wanted a real, proper, full education. So she aimed for a goal no deaf-blind person had ever tried college. This decision shocked everyone. Some admired her, others mocked, but Helen didn't care. She enrolled at Cambridge School for Young Ladies, a prep school for women hoping to get into Radcliffe College, Harvard's sister school. Exhausting, you bet. Anne Sullivan attended every class with Helen, spelling out entire lectures into her hand, letter by letter, hour after hour. Imagine taking notes when you can't see the blackboard, can't hear the professor, and must absorb every word through touch. Every textbook had to be converted to Braille. Every test read aloud, word by word. Helen studied Latin, French, algebra, geometry, philosophy, history, literature. Her days were long, her nights even longer. She often went to bed with aching hands and a spinning mind. There were moments of real frustration, tears, exhaustion, even doubt. But she never gave up. People who couldn't see the blackboard, couldn't hear the professor, and had to absorb every word by touch. Every textbook had to be converted to Braille. Every test was painstakingly read, word for word. Helen studied Latin, French, algebra, geometry, philosophy, history, literature. Her days were long, her nights even longer. She often went to bed with aching hands and a dizzy mind. There were truly frustrating moments, tears, exhaustion, even doubt. But she never gave up. She got into Radcliffe College in 1900. Suddenly, she was more than a student. She was an icon. Newspapers followed her story. Photographers tried to capture images of her learning, reading, writing. Everyone wanted to see the blind girl with brains. But Helen didn't want to be a joke. She wanted to learn, not just be a novelty, but as an equal at Radcliffe. She kept hitting the books hard, even when the administration was still skeptical. Some professors doubted her smarts. Others found Anne Sullivan's constant presence distracting. But Helen kept proving her intelligence again and again. In 1904, at 24, Helen Keller graduated with honors from Radcliffe College, becoming the first deaf-blind person on Earth to snag a college degree. She dove into academia without seeing or hearing a thing, and she crushed it. But this wasn't just a personal win. It was a loud, public statement that disability doesn't mean inability. The human spirit, given a chance, can smash any barrier, and Helen was just warming up, now educated, sharp, and ready to shake things up. She set her sights on a new battlefield activism. Helen Keller couldn't hear the crowd's cheers or see her name in print, but she could feel injustice, and she refused to stay quiet about it. After finishing school, Helen stepped into a new role, not a student anymore, but a fighter, a voice for the unheard, a symbol for those the world ignored. She became a fierce advocate for the blind and deaf, but she didn't stop there. Helen fought poverty, women's suffrage, racism, child labor, and workers' rights. She slammed powerful corporations, backed birth control, and even spoke out. Against war, people expected a quiet, delicate lady. What they got was a political hurricane. She joined the Socialist Party in 1909, arguing capitalism crushed the poor while the rich got richer. This shocked many fans who were happy to cheer her beating disability, but not so much her challenging their bank accounts when accused of being deceived. She fired back, "Yes, I'm blind and deaf, but I'm not blind to social injustice or deaf to the cries of the suffering." She toured the country, sometimes with Anne Sullivan translating her words. She met world leaders, presidents, authors, and revolutionaries. She was blunt, smart, and impossible to ignore. She campaigned for the American Foundation for the Blind, raising awareness and funds nationwide. She testified before Congress, pushed for Braille books in libraries, and fought for equal education rights for people with disabilities. And she wrote books, essays, columns, and letters. Her pen was a sword, and she wielded it fearlessly. The public eye. She was a walking paradox, a woman who couldn't see or hear, yet saw clearer than most, and spoke louder than anyone with perfect hearing. She demanded dignity, not just for herself, but for the overlooked, the voiceless, the forgotten. And even though many disagreed with her politics, no one could deny her presence. Helen Keller once lived in a world without words. Now, her words were changing the world. As Helen Keller aged, the world admired her even more. She became a global icon, a symbol of courage, intelligence, and unstoppable will. From Tokyo to Cairo, Washington to Moscow, her name meant strength and hope. She traveled to 35 countries, fighting for the rights of the blind and disabled. Crowds gathered just to see her take the stage. Heads of state bowed to shake her hand. Children reached out, wide-eyed, as if touching her might pass on a spark of her fire. But behind the applause, there was always crowd gathered just to watch her step on stage. Heads of state bowed and shook her hand. Kids with outstretched arms stared wide-eyed, as if touching her might transfer a spark of her fire. Yet behind the applause, there was always darkness. Anne Sullivan, her companion, teacher, and closest friend, began to weaken in the 1920s. For decades, they had been inseparable, two souls intertwined by struggle and love. But in 1936, Anne passed away. Helen was devastated. She had known darkness. She had known silence. But the silence left by Anne's absence was different. It was deeper, and she kept going. She found support in Polly Thompson, who became her interpreter and new companion. Together, they carried on the mission, public speaking, fundraising. In 1948, she toured post-war Japan, meeting wounded soldiers, kids in shattered schools, and people who'd lost everything. Her presence gave them more than comfort. It showed them what survival looks like when all else fails. She racked up dozens of honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of America's highest civilian awards. Universities handed her honorary degrees. Charities took her name. Books and movies told her story, but Helen wasn't in it for the trophies. She cared about blind kids getting books, deaf adults finding work, and people who'd felt invisible finally being seen. Even as her health declined in later years, she kept writing letters, reading messages, and championing causes she believed in. She once said, "Though the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it." She lived both sides of that coin, staying true and tough the whole time. On June 1st, 1968, at 87 years old, Helen Keller died peacefully in her sleep at home in Connecticut. A woman who once lived in silence and darkness was mourned by presidents, poets, activists, and ordinary folks worldwide, many who never even met her. But death didn't shut her up. Helen became more than a person. She turned into a force, a symbol of what the human spirit can do when faced with the worst and still dares to rise. Born into a world that gave her nothing, no sight, no sound, no speech, she built a life that left nothing out. She helped rewrite how people see disability. She shattered the idea that blindness means helplessness or deafness means stupidity. She proved communication isn't just about ears or eyes. It's born from the soul. Helen wrote 14 books, gave hundreds of speeches, and met every U.S. president from Grover Cleveland to Lyndon B. Johnson. She changed laws. She changed organizations. But most importantly, she changed minds. Her life wasn't easy, and she never pretended it was. She faced illness, rejection, grief, and public criticism, but she never let those things define her. Instead, she claimed her identity with fierce pride. She once said, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something." And what she did reshaped history. Today, plenty of schools bear her name. Statues honor her. Her books are still read, and her quotes are shared among those who need strength. When life gets too heavy, when silence feels too loud, when darkness seems endless, her legacy reminds us there's always a way out. You might not see it, you might not hear it, but you can become it. Helen Keller never saw a sunrise. She never heard applause, but she taught the world how to listen, and that voice never fades. Long before runways and designer labels, fashion started where civilization began with sunlight, sand, and the daily grind to survive. In ancient Egypt, fashion wasn't just practical, it was sacred, with the Nile as their mirror and the desert as their backdrop. Egyptians draped themselves in lightweight, airy linen made from flax growing along the riverbanks. You might not hear it, but you can become it. Helen Keller never saw the sunrise. She never heard applause, but she taught the world how to listen, and that voice never faded. Long before stages and designer labels, fashion started where civilization did sunlight, sand, and the struggle to survive. In ancient Egypt, fashion wasn't just practical, it was sacred, with the Nile as a mirror and the desert as a backdrop. Egyptians draped themselves in lightweight linen made from flax grown along the riverbanks. But it wasn't just to beat the heat. Clothing was spiritual and symbolic. Pharaohs wore intricately pleated skirts, gold collars, and elaborate necklaces inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise. Every color had its meaning. White stood for purity, green for fertility, blue for the gods. The more detailed the texture, the higher your status. Even kids didn't wear clothes until puberty. Their innocence was on full display, while the elite were wrapped like living statues, their outfits reflecting cosmic order and balance. Across the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, fashion had the same double purpose: protect and flaunt status. Men rocked wool skirts cinched with belts. Women layered cloaks and veils. The earliest fashion law, Hammurabi's Code, which literally dictated who could wear what. Veils were for noble women only. Slaves, nope, forbidden. Ancient India added some color to the mix. With hand-woven cotton and early silk, people sported saris, dhotis, and turbans dyed with plant-based dyes like indigo and madder root. Their fabrics told stories of regions, rituals, and rhythms. The Indian Valley might not have left us tons of written history, but those tiny clay figurines show off hairstyles, jewelry, and timeless textiles. Then there's China, where silk wasn't just fabric, it was a revolution. Legend says Empress Lezu discovered it when a silkworm cocoon dropped into her tea by the Shang dynasty. Silk was a top-secret national treasure, guarded like gold. Who wore silk? Elites, rulers, the divinely favored. Even early fashion wasn't random. It split. Kings from servants, priests from peasants, men from women, and sometimes mortals from gods. The shape of the cloak, the twist of the belt, the color of the thread. Fashion was language before writing, art before galleries, and way before anyone said, "Look at me." Clothes were stealing the spotlight in marble halls, in Athens, and on crowded Roman streets. Fashion became philosophy and uniform of identity. Ancient Greeks loved balance architecture, ideas, and even fabric folds. Men wore chaitons, rectangular linen pinned at the shoulders and belted at the waist. Women draped themselves in peplos or himatians, graceful folds turning bodies into living sculptures. Simple sandals, neat hairstyles, and jewelry were there, but always in harmony. To the Greeks, beauty was moral. Simplicity meant virtue. Decorations were allowed, but nothing too flashy. Then Rome showed up, and Rome never whispered. Roman fashion was all about spectacle, power, and status. Where Greeks draped, Romans layered and legislated. The toga, a single 20-foot-long wool piece, became the ultimate status symbol. Not everyone got to wear one, only male Roman citizens. And even then, rules applied. The toga virilis was for grown men. The toga praetexta, with purple stripes, for senators and judges. And the gold-embroidered toga, reserved for emperors and victorious generals. Each a power outfit. Under the toga, everyone wore a tunic, the everyday wear of the ancient world. Simple knee length for men, ankle length for women, but even tunics told stories. A wealthy Roman might sport a tunic made of Egyptian linen or dyed with rare murex purple, a color pricier than gold. Women's fashion in Rome got the same upgrade. Murex purple so expensive it outvalued gold. Women's fashion in Rome got the same upgrade. Street vendors noticed a married woman's signal, the palla, a cloak-like shawl adding modesty and mobility. Hair was curled, braided, piled high, and sometimes decorated with golden or ivory pins. Fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was a message about fertility, virtue, and social belonging. Even slaves had fashion roles, defined by what they weren't allowed to wear. In both Greece and Rome, clothes weren't just protection, they shouted rank, role, and a wealthy Roman might wear a tunic woven from Egyptian linen or dyed with the rare Murex purple, a dye so pricey it was worth more than gold. Women's fashion in Rome got the same upgrade. Murex purple was so expensive it outpriced gold. Women's fashion in Rome got the same makeover. Street vendors noticed a married woman, the palla, a shawl-like cloak, gave modesty and ease of movement. Hair was curled, braided, piled high, and sometimes decked out with golden or ivory hairpins. Fashion's not just about looking good, it's a message about fertility, virtue, and social standing. Even slaves had a fashion role defined by what they weren't allowed to wear. In both Greece and Rome, clothes weren't just body armor. They shouted your rank, role, and citizenship. Every fold, every fabric, every color was a statement. You didn't just wear a toga, you wore your whole country. Rome wrapped itself in wool, Greece in linen, and Asia spun something way fancier, silk. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was a fashion superhighway stretching from China all the way to the Mediterranean. It hauled not just goods, but ideas, fabrics, and style trends. It carried not only goods, but ideas, fabrics, and styles that shaped clothing for centuries. The heart of this story is China, where silk wasn't just an export item. It was a symbol of imperial control. For centuries, silk-making secrets were guarded like top-secret state intel. Only royalty and high officials could rock the fanciest silks dyed in exclusive emperor-only colors, like that legendary royal yellow. Chinese clothing, especially during the Tang and Han dynasties, was an architectural and symbolic masterpiece. Dragon, phoenix, and cloud embroidery weren't just decoration, they were spiritual status signals. A person's robe could spill more tea than a whole scroll of text. Moving west to India, fashion took a different turn, bold, colorful, and downright sensual. The sari, still worn today, dates back thousands of years, made from cotton or smooth silk, dyed with indigo and turmeric. Saris aren't just pretty, they're regional badges of honor. The folds, fabric, and borders reveal a woman's origin, class, and status. Meanwhile, in Japan, elegance met armor during the Han dynasty. Nobles layered silk robes called junihito, showing carefully coordinated sleeve and collar colors, a poetic fashion statement. But when the samurai rose to power, fashion shifted toward function and symbolism. Enter the kimono, worn by warriors and commoners alike. The kimono packed layers of meaning material, weave, and design reflected the season, occasion, and even political loyalty. Samurai sometimes wore their kimono under armor, with clan crests proudly displayed for geishas and courtiers. Kimono sleeves became moving canvases. Asian fashion balanced tradition with finesse, restraint with richness, every fold, pattern, and stitch was intentional. And as fabrics traveled the Silk Road, Asia quietly schooled the world in one big lesson: clothing isn't just about protection or praise. It's culture stitched right into your skin. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, clothes were more than what you put on, they were who you were. From castle halls to candlelit courts, fashion became a chessboard where every thread was a move, and every outfit a power play, virtue or rebellion. Back then, clothes screamed class, poor folks in rough wool and plain linen, the rich walking tapestries, cloaks trimmed with fur, jeweled belts, and elaborate crowns screamed wealth and piety. Dye was everything. Deep blue meant wealth. Bright red was reserved strictly for royalty and cardinals. Then came the strict laws, literally legal rules, dictating who could wear what based on social rank. Dare to wear silk without noble blood, not just a fashion faux pas, that was a crime. In Renaissance Italy, fashion turned into high art. Florence and Venice led the way, creating outrageously lavish outfits that seemed to thumb their noses at gravity. Men sported puffed sleeves and doublets with slashes. Women wore velvet gowns with stiff bodices and sleeves embroidered with family legends and political power plays. No coincidence that in this age of Renaissance intellect, fashion was seriously theatrical. The more fabric you wore, the less work you had to do. A silent status flex, watch me waste fabric like a pro. Then came the corset, originally for shape and modesty. It evolved into a body-shaping control device, cinching waists, lifting chests, and ultimately becoming a symbol of female elegance and restraint. The ideal female body turned into an architectural marvel, and at the grand palaces of France and England, waist cinching, bust lifting, and eventually became the symbol of women's elegance and restraint. The ideal female body turned into an architectural marvel, and in the grand palaces of France and England, fashion hit dizzying new heights literally, with towering wigs, ruffled collars, and skirts propped up on scaffolds. Women moved like chandeliers. Men weren't slouches either, rocking tight pants, jewelry, codpieces, and shoes curved like punctuation marks. Fashion was power. A courtier's cloak could make or break your reputation. Being seen was everything. Being misunderstood was in the world of crowns and backstabbing. Clothes were armor not just against the cold, but against mediocrity. By the 17th century, European fashion was a full-on spectacle. At the French court of King Louis XIII, fashion wasn't just a hobby, it was policy. Versailles was a stage, and everyone was in costume. Men strutted in gold-embroidered brocade coats, lace cuffs, silk stockings, and red high heels. The king's signature move. Their hair was powdered, perfumed, and topped with towering wigs, often decked out with curls, ribbons, and sometimes even tiny ships. Women's dresses were architectural marvels, wide skirts stretching several feet on each side, layered, pleated, and stitched tight enough to hold shape without collapsing. pale, powdered faces, blushed cheeks, and beauty marks placed like exclamation points. Beautiful, ridiculous, and deeply political in a world where wealth meant power. Fashion was the language of elite separation. For nobles, clothes boosted status beyond the ordinary. For everyone else, it was a harsh reminder of their decline. Then came the French Revolution. In 1789, the people stormed Versailles, not just the palace, but everything it stood for: excess, inequality, silk, and satin that made bread seem worthless. The guillotine wasn't just for kings. It took wigs, high heels, corsets. The elite's fashion became the enemy's uniform. Suddenly, simplicity was power. Breeches without fancy cuts proudly rejected the knee-length pants of nobles. Instead, people wore plain trousers, the working class's outfit. Flashy clothes, at this point, weren't just silly, they were downright dangerous. After the revolution, fashion also got more democratic. The classical world was worshipped. Clean lines, natural fabrics, Greek-inspired dresses, wigs, and heavy makeup vanished overnight. Even Napoleon got that clothes were strategy. His military uniform was designed for drama and authority, shaping the image of a strong, modern leader. His wife, Josephine, popularized high-waisted, sheer dresses, redefining elegance for the Empire era. But powdered wigs became relics. Fashion shifted from flaunting wealth to redefining identity. The revolution changed not just France's rulers, but everyone's wardrobe for survival. The 19th century kicked off with the hiss of steam engines and the buzz of weaving looms. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how people worked, it changed how they dressed. Suddenly, clothes weren't just for nobles and royalty anymore. Machines could spin, dye, and sew fabric faster than human hands. Mass production meant cheaper prices, wider availability, and, for the first time ever, fashion became popular. But even with modern production, style still came from showiness. Women's fashion got richer, more dramatic, widespread, and almost ridiculous. The invention of the crinoline, a steel cage worn under skirts, let women wear dresses that puffed out like open umbrellas. Some were up to 6 feet wide, forcing women to sidestep through doors and almost spin on the dance floor. The message was clear: if your dress stops you from working, walking, or even sitting comfortably, you're probably rich enough not to care. Meanwhile, corsets were tightened even more, shaping waists like a wasp's. The ideal woman became a fragile hourglass drifting on waves of silk, lace, and tulle. Fashion was both a prison and a pedestal. For men, slipping through doors and almost spinning around the ballroom, the message was crystal clear: if you could wear a dress that made it impossible to work, walk, or even sit comfortably, maybe you were wealthy enough not to care. Meanwhile, corsets tightened even more, shaping waists to a bee-like ratio. The ideal woman became a fragile hourglass drifting on a sea of silk, lace, and tulle. Fashion was both a prison and a pedestal. For men, style focused on sharp, elegant lines, tailcoats, overcoats, top hats, the uniform of a dashing gentleman Around this time, the modern suit started to form clean, discreet, professional, serious, but not flashy. But beneath the surface, new trends were bubbling up. Department stores popped up in cities, offering ready-to-wear clothes for the growing middle class. Fashion magazines like Good Lady's Book and La Belle Assemblée began shaping tastes, and with photography's arrival, people could finally see what fashion really looked like. What fashion looked like beyond their little villages. The sewing machine's debut in the 1850s shook things up again, not just in production, but also personal creativity. Home sewing patterns got popular. Fashion got way more accessible. Clothes stopped being an exclusive upper-class club. They became a way to express yourself. Even Queen Victoria influenced trends, making white wedding dresses, black mourning wear, and modesty a fashion thing. In this new industrial world, clothes didn't just reflect identity anymore. They were literally stitching it together. As the 20th century kicked off, fashion stood at a crossroads, torn between the elegance of corsets past and the rising freedom ahead. Then World War I happened, and everything changed. As men marched off to war, women stepped into factories, fields, and offices. The corset, once daily ritual, suddenly became impractical, even dangerous. Dresses got shorter, fabrics lighter, practicality became patriotic. Women in uniforms, pants, and simple tailored jackets started, rewriting what it meant to be feminine. After the war, going back was not on the menu. The 1920s brought us new icon, the flapper. She rocked off-the-shoulder dresses, bobbed hair, red lips, and danced in speakeasies, with a cigarette in one hand and rebellion in the other. Her dresses sparkled with fringe and beads. Her knees scandalized society, and her confidence challenged generations of restraint. This was fashion as freedom, as defiance. Meanwhile, the Jazz Age men favored sharp suits, wide-legged pants, slicked-back hair, and Oxford shoes. Hollywood made this look even cooler on and off screen. Stars like Greta Garbo and Clark Gable set trends that fans worldwide followed. Then disaster struck. The Great Depression of the 1930s forced fashion to take a conservative U-turn. Hemlines dropped, colors dulled, people patched. Instead of bought, style didn't die. It adapted. Old clothes got refashioned. Floral scarves turned into dresses. Movie stars became style icons of hope amid economic despair. When World War II broke out, fashion became its own battlefield. Materials were rationed. Skirts got shorter, jackets looser, fabrics tougher. In the U.S., the government issued Regulation L85 limiting fabric allowed in civilian clothes. Nylon, once for stockings, got redirected to parachutes. European women wore practical, efficient, minimalist clothes that often looked like uniforms. Men went back to military and combat gear, but from these restrictions came innovation. Women started wearing longer pants. Shoulder pads added structure. Designers like Elsa Schiaparelli introduced surreal elements that thumbed their noses at austerity. Before the global conflict, fashion wasn't just about style. It became resilience, a signal to the world that even in chaos, We could choose who we were and what we wore to survive. The world emerged from what we's ravaged but craving beauty. And in 1947, French designer Christian Dior delivered just that. He called it the new look cinched waists, full skirts, soft shoulders, and delicate fabrics. A spectacular comeback of luxury, celebrating femininity, elegance, and control. For many women, it felt like a breath of fresh air after years of rationing and uniforms. But not everyone applauded. For some, the new look was a step backward, a return to narrow ideals after decades of progress. The tug of war between tradition and change would shape fashion for luxury and control. For many women, it felt like a breath of fresh air after years stuck in uniforms and rationed styles. But not everyone was clapping. For some, the new look was a step backward, a return to narrow ideals after decades of progress. The tug of war between tradition and change would shape fashion for many decades to come. In the 1950s, American suburbs embraced neat haircuts, pearls, pencil skirts, gray wool suits, and everything ironed to perfection. But beneath that glossy surface, rebellion was simmering. Teenagers, a freshly minted demographic, started rejecting their parents' look. They idolized screen rebels like James Dean and Marlon Brando plain white tees, leather jackets, and blue jeans that screamed rough, real, and dangerous. And that, my friend, was denim. Once the badge of the American working class, denim became the rebellious youth's uniform. It wasn't fashion for you. It was fashion as you defined it. Then came the 1960s, a revolution not just on TV, but worn on your body. London's modern culture birthed tight suits, mini skirts, and bold prints. Hippies loved embroidery, bell-bottoms, and thrift store finds. Fashion turned political anti-war, anti-establishment, anti-everything that came before. Hippies favored embroidery, bell-bottoms, and second-hand clothes. Fashion became a protest, rejecting the system and every old rule. By the 1970s, lines blurred, oatmeal fashion was still a thing. But street style found its own voice. Music fueled fashion, from disco sequins to ripped shirts and punk safety pins. And through it all, jeans endured, dressed sharp, looked distressed, or torn to protest. Designers like Yves Saint Laurent and Vivienne Westwood totally got it. Fashion was no longer top-down. It was more like a two-way mirror, reflecting and shaping the world at the same time. Clothes weren't just about class or gender anymore. They were about attitude, identity, and resistance. From Dior's silk to Levi's denim, fashion became something totally new. Not just what you wear, but who you are. As the 20th century wrapped up, fashion transformed. It stopped asking what we should wear and started asking who we are. The 21st century kicked off with fresh energy, driven by identity, diversity, and the rise of the digital age. Fashion wasn't dictated by seasonal trends, whispered in Paris and Milan's halls anymore. Now it spreads on Instagram, TikTok, and every corner of Seoul, Nairobi, and New York, trends went global and instant. A teenager with a smartphone could spark a movement faster than a runway show. The rise of fast fashion made style more accessible than ever. Brands like Zara, H&M, and Forever 21 churned out runway-inspired looks at breakneck speed, but of course, it came with a price: environmental damage, exploitative labor, and growing awareness of fashion's darker side. So, sustainability became the new cool. Designers started rethinking materials, waste, and responsibility. Thrift shops boomed. Recycling got trendy. Capsule wardrobes and buying less but better became the mantra. But the real revolution was representation. For decades, fashion favored one body type, one skin tone, one ideal. Now the industry is changing. Designers cast models of every race, size, gender, and ability. Runways feature hijabs, wheelchairs, albinism, and drag performances. What was once fringe is now front and center. Fashion became a battleground for cultural conversations. Think Black Lives Matter slogans on high fashion gowns, pride parades, rocked heels, and glitter like armor for protest. Indigenous designers revived traditional patterns as a statement of survival. Gender no longer a cage, from gender-neutral tailoring to skirts in the men's section. Fashion's binary lines are fading. Icons like Billy Porter, Harry Styles, and Zendaya wear clothes not to make a statement, but to show freedom. And in the virtual universe, avatars sport outfits that could never exist in real life. Digital fashion, no fabric, no waste, just pixels and imagination, is carving its own niche. Fashion today is everywhere and belongs to everyone. The language that started with ancient Egyptian linen has become global. Fashion today is everywhere and belongs to everyone. The language that started with linen in ancient Egypt has become a global tongue. Folks can whisper tradition, shout rebellion, or just say, "This is me," because in the end, fashion isn't just what we wear, it's how we show the world who we really are.